All right, well, we're ready to get rolling. So this is the October City of Bend Water Advisory Group meeting. So happy to see everybody. I know I got a lot of out of office messages when we sent out the meeting reminder and agenda last week. So hopefully folks are enjoying some time to refresh and do a bit of traveling here as the seasons change. But we're excited about today's conversation. Just a quick note on our speakers. So Dan is going to kick us off and be the main speaker for the first part of our meeting. And then Elizabeth is going to take up the second half. And Brian is going to be co-opted into a speaker role for that too. He's been contributing to some of the template development. So we have 2 topics in store, hour and a half on our schedule per usual. We want to share, for those of you who were part of the tour at the Butte Overturf site in June of earlier this year, this will be a chance to kind of revisit how that project has continued working after the team got a chance to walk around and kick the dirt and chat about managing for a variety of different goals at those urban open spaces. So Deanna's going to share an update on that project and then talk a little bit about and invite input from this group about managing those types of sites moving forward and what values are important and what partnerships and opportunities there might be. That'll be about the first hour of our conversation here. And then we're going to dip over into stormwater and share a template and invite some more input. So quick note on meeting look ahead. We always close with this too, but just as a reminder, this is the last meeting that will have the Boyd Acres location as part of our hybrid typical format. Next meeting, we're just going to be virtual, and that's to accommodate that change in terms of the staff moving from current location to new location. So virtual only in November. And then we'll have a chance in December for those who want to attend in person to do a little walkabout at the campus after we do our year in review conversation. And I just added a quick note on some of the topics that we're thinking about for spring of 2026. We'll have more on this as we move forward, but just wanted to give folks a preview of what we have rolling around as ideas for our spring series of meetings in 2026. Okay, one more quick note. If you weren't able to make our September meeting, had a great conversation that Austin led to give some highlights of the Stormwater Master Plan. He went through kind of the types of priority capital projects, the programmatic solutions, policy recommendations, a lot of ways that the WAG has contributed to development of that plan over time. If you didn't get a chance to see that, even taking a look at those slides might be enjoyable for you to see how input has been reflected and what that plan looks like in its final stage. We also spent some time and asked for input on this idea of centralized on-site stormwater facilities as a strategy for managing drainage and denser development. We asked about, is there a minimum lot size that would make sense to tip over into that centralized on-site stormwater option? And it sounds like folks generally feel that's practical, but it'd be nice to keep an exception for some flexibility. We also shared some ways that the city is already planning to encourage and kind of get education and awareness out about that subdivision level type facility, building in awareness of the code, doing early developer guidance through the pre-app and so forth, private maintenance agreements, and invited this group's ideas and input on that topic. And I noted a couple things on the approach considerations. I think what we heard from this group is that a more kind of robust and thoughtful pre-app consultation would be helpful, kind of in that upstream space, and thinking about ways to communicate to applicants that there's a chance to tick multiple boxes with some of these strategies. So like the open space requirements, I think Kristen, you mentioned that. Also, just this group seemed appreciative of the fee in lieu option as a way, particularly for infill development, to accomplish these goals. And then we chatted a bit about some other models that are being used elsewhere, brokerage models, SDCs for funding, percent coverage versus lot size as ways to navigate this space. So a lot of good discussion last meeting. I guess, Lori, anything else you wanted to add on those notes?
I don't think so. Thanks, everybody. We still hope to be able to take the Stormwater Master Plan to council, I think in December. So crossing our fingers about that. Also planning to kick off more intensive discussions about how to implement the drainage and density recommendations starting in January. I would have loved to have started that by now, but we have some staffing limitations in development engineering and we have to wait till they fill a bit of a gap there. But anyways, thank you on that.
And I will maybe note too, I mean, we have, we get into a lot of content when we have these conversations. We try to leave enough space for good conversation, but also invite folks in between meetings. If you have additional thoughts, insights, questions that come up, definitely reach out. I know folks did after our last meeting, and that's definitely appreciated and invited. All right, just give it a beat in case somebody else has a thought on stormwater master plan or drainage and density that you want to chime in on. And otherwise, we can move over to our first topic. I wonder though, Lori, maybe we should go around the room just with the names. We did not do that yet today. Or do you want to just dive in?
Because we're just tiny dots on the screen.
Yeah.
Okay, let's we'll start with Bronwyn.
Okay. Bronwyn Master, Landscape Architect, then Park and Recreation District.
And then everybody knows me, Lori Faya.
Rick Martinson.
Amy Jo Detweiler.
Dan Denning, Water Services, Water Conservation.
Shannon Ostendorf, Deschutes County. Elizabeth O'Keefe, Water Services Department, Stormwater Program.
That's it for us.
And then maybe, Brad, do you want to say hello?
Brad Mandel, Assistant Building Official.
And Brian?
Hi, everyone.
Yep. Brian Wilkinson, AKS Engineering, Civil Engineer.
Pablo?
Sorry, Pablo Martos, Oregon Department of Environmental Quality, Municipal Stormwater Program Coordinator.
Kristen?
Kristen Reidelberger, Central Oregon Land Watch.
And let's see, Ian.
Hi, everyone. Ian Gray, Urban Forester for the City of Bend.
Great. And Ariel?
Hi, everyone. Ariel Cowan, Oregon State University Extension.
Ashlyn?
I'm Ashlyn Gribsko with Polish Homes.
And Mark?
Hi, Mark Buckley, Economist at Metro Northwest.
Awesome. Did I miss anybody? We have a good mix of Water Advisory Group members as well as a few extra guests today and faces in the room. So welcome to everybody and looking forward to a great conversation. All right, Dan, it's over to you.
Thanks, Aubrey. Well, good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining today. I left the slides to a minimum. Hopefully this topic, we can have a little bit more of a discussion. We've got some kind of key topics and key questions we'd like to prompt that discussion with. But I wanted to start off with kind of why we're talking about this today, and kind of give a recap of where we left off last June with our tour around Overturf Butte. So for those that weren't there in June, we met to tour this city facility on the west side of Bend. It's kind of a commingled use. We've got, you know, a utility water site, well and reservoir site, excuse me, a reservoir site. We've got parks, dog park in here. It's kind of, you know, intertwined into this residential urban neighborhood. And so there's, you know, the trail system. There are, you know, stormwater swales in here to capture runoff. So it's a quite heavily used site. And in early spring, we responded to some concerns from the neighborhood about, you know, fire mitigation or fire concerns in this area. So we responded, we took our City of Bend fire inspector out to do an assessment, quick assessment, just to figure out how we were going to tackle what the scope of the work would be for the fire remediation on this site. And came up with a suggestion of a 20-foot shadowing around the perimeter, fire break around the perimeter. So we took the WAG group up there and collected lots of feedback. So really appreciative of that. And geared towards and centered around, like, what are we going to do with these sites long term, right? This is an initial response to a complaint or a concern. but how do we want to manage this, this site long-term? So that's kind of what we're going to talk about a little bit today, hopefully, and get some of your input. Next slide, please, Aubrey. So just a little recap of what we did. We put together the evaluation and the prescription of work. We had the WAG tour, and then, you know, by that time we're already running up into the heat of summer. And, you know, a few weeks later, fire restrictions came out regarding like chainsaws and time of day work. So we were kind of under the gun to get some of this work done. Collected several bids and ended up contracting with Mountain Sky to get the work done. The cost of this was not cheap. I think we paid $25,000 for this 20-foot buffer. The prescription was essentially a mosaic of, based on the recommendations of looming up trees, you know, 6-foot height of any underhanging branches of the skirt of the tree. We removed trees under 6 inches and created a 10-foot spacing off of large shrubs and trees. We did leave most of the bunch grass just for soil stabilization. A lot of this site is pretty steep grade. So, and you can see in that photo, I mean, there is that alleyway adjacent to those properties. So we wanted to make sure we didn't create another stormwater issue other than what kind of already exists due to some of the use. But then we went out and we did door-to-door notifications. We sent out a letter to all the neighboring residents. A lot of positive feedback. We got a lot of people very thankful that we were, you know, following through and addressing this. We got a few requests for additional work to be done. People asking if we could come remove some of their trees, things like that, to be expected. But overall, pretty positive experience. We did hear some folks that were concerned with some of the down tree material being fire fuel. We did have one neighbor come out and express concern that we were removing the quail habitat by removing some of the large brush. But in large, we had everybody on board. So next slide, Aubrey. Here's a few photos of just kind of the work that was done. So again, trying to remove those ladder fuels, the dense brush. Next slide, please, Aubrey. And as you can see, a lot of this abutted, I mean, directly went up to like the fence lines of the property lines of the homeowners. Next slide. So, you know, looking back at this single effort, it made us think, you know, well, how many more of these sites, of these large urban open spaces do we have that the city owns? So this is another utility site. This is our Rock Bluff site. This is on the southwest part of town. It sits just above the Deschutes River Trail there. So if you were to go to like the top left corner of that photo, the Deschutes River sits down in there. But this is, you know, multiple acres. This is all native, like ponderosa, some juniper, a lot of manzanita and bunch grass in there, as well as some cheatgrass. But again, we're directly adjacent to a large urban neighborhood, as well as some open space that COID owns to the north of that. And so it brought up the question, you know, with fire mediation or fire risk mitigation, how do we treat these areas and similar areas like in HOAs, big open spaces, common areas, possibly schools or parks would have other examples of locations like this. And what is the expectation and you know, what would the treatment be for these? So next slide, please, Aubrey.
If you want to mention too, Dan, there was also interaction with our tree code on that as well.
Right. So if you look, I guess it would be to the south. So you can see kind of like the large congregation of, they're mostly pondos, kind of abutting the few houses there on Quail Pine Loop. So this brings into when we have, densely packed trees. How do we address our own code for tree preservation or tree removal on our city-owned sites as well when we're trying to tackle this this mitigation effort? So it just adds another layer to this, right? So getting the tree assessments, creating tree plans, that sort of thing on these sites. Next slide, please, Aubrey. And so this is kind of, based off of that. I think the first thing we want to try to do is create values, right, around what we want these sites to be long-term. What are the other uses or users of these spaces? Some of these, not all of these, are open to the public, but maintaining the functionality and operation and protection of our water sites, as well as the ecology and balancing all these other values. So these are some of the things that we listed to kind of spur the conversation or considerations that we think, should be considered in putting a long-term plan together. So you don't have to remember these. We can flip back to this slide, but these are just kind of to prompt us, but we want to get your feedback. Next slide, Aubrey. So moving forward, we kind of all were in agreement the day of the tour that, it would be great to put together a long-term management plan for these sites. We don't necessarily have unlimited resources. So what are the key steps and key partners or stakeholders that we need to engage in this? What are the end goals? What are the objectives of this plan? How do we define success, right? And then what other evaluations or what other data is needed, to make this plan successful, right? And then obviously that'll help us identify, financial needs, and the partners that we want to bring into this. So I think the next slide is our questions. Does anybody have any questions on what we went through thus far before we get to the discussion?
What kind of latitude is in the tree preservation code for dealing with, like that one slide you had where you were referencing that thick stand of ponderosa adjacent? How much latitude is there? Yeah, that slide. In dealing with that, do you?
So I mean, I think we do have a little bit of wiggle room, and we do have Ian here who maybe can speak to it a little bit more. But I think we have some leniency depending on the type of work. I mean, if the work is for fire mitigation, there's a little bit of leniency there. But essentially, I mean, we're beholden to our own code. And it would basically be, an assessment by an arborist or a fire official to go out and identify the problem trees and help us put that prescription together. Good question. So go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, any other thoughts from the group or kind of reflections back from that tour process? I'll put our discussion questions back up here on the screen.
I think there was one of the things we discussed at the field trip, folks remember, and Ariel was definitely part of this conversation, but was kind of trying to balance between what our fire folks were wanting removed versus keeping that set of ecological values and being able to, I don't know, I guess not rip out everything, right? So I think that's part of this. I'm sorry, Shannon, go ahead.
I was just gonna ask if you could put the criteria up on the previous slide. This one.
The plan objectives. Oh, yeah, sure.
This one.
Yeah.
This came from, again, where did this come from?
These are kind of our own ideas.
Okay.
Of what we'd be trying to address on some of these sites.
For discussion today too.
Yeah. Something I think is missing is like a lot of those sites have chlorine canisters on them. and or cylinders, and so like having some extensive fire protection around those buildings, so extra risk maybe as a factor. I know like I live near the Rock Bluff one, and I know there's a school nearby as well, so like from a fire perspective, I would want more focus on the areas where you're storing hazardous chemicals.
Okay.
Good one.
Say from our perspective, since we get a lot of questions and comments on how we're managing, you know, our larger natural spaces, especially, but even some of our more developed parks is something I think we've already started down the road of, but is that conversation of how we're talking with the community about it and having a cohesive message as much as we can across different agencies, because I know like our natural resources folks, they've done like partnered with Ben Fire a lot and gone out and, you know, spoken with communities about like kind of how we're managing fire fuel risk on our property. I always mix up the words a little bit, but then compared to what like individual homeowners need to do. So I think the more consistent the message is, you know, across agencies, or like, you know, if there are some opportunities to have like similar approaches, or then talking about like why we might manage something different here than over there. Because we also get questions about like, oh, those down trees, are they a risk or are they habitat, you know, those types of things. So.
Well, I really like that idea of having a set of hopefully matching objectives so we can talk the same with folks. I would think that would be with the county too, right? I think that would be kind of a good idea to maybe have a joint discussion about that.
I think the other thing, and maybe it's integrated, is the protection of the infrastructure. So like there's some critical things that happen if that infrastructure gets impacted, right? So maintaining operability and like just that they have clearances to work and they can get in and access the site.
Ariel, I think you had some
future planning.
Yeah, in terms of aligning on messaging, which is great, I always want to encourage that, and we're not the only ones who are interested in that. The Central Oregon Fire Prevention Co-op has a subcommittee on wildfire educators, and one of the goals is to work together on what that aligned messaging is. And we do have the county a part of those conversations. They're a member of that group. So I would invite, perhaps there's a liaison from this group that can join us. Or I don't know, we could get creative and think of a different way, but wanted to bring up that possibility. We definitely would welcome new members to be part of that. But just for your awareness that it ends up being a conversation that covers all of Central Oregon. But which I think is great, though, that we have, you know, consistent messaging across all of Central Oregon. And then I would say, like with the values, yeah, just really identifying which of those values are wanting or needing protection first, and then working around them, whether that be that chlorine facility or you know, people's homes and things like that. And I know, yeah, from this list, there's a lot, but in those cases, then you're not gonna leave out the wildlife element and the other, you know, health, forest health part of it, if that is a value that rises to the top. And I would encourage thinking about it from that ecosystem health, forest health lens as well, because then there's overlap with working towards that value and the risk reduction, fire risk reduction value. That if those properties are set up where the trees are healthy, then they'll be more ready to receive fire if fire did come through, that you would be less likely to then lose those trees, that those trees would die, and then you would end up, you know, not only losing, you know, those trees themselves, but also the shade that they provide and the other values that they provide there. but also acknowledging how a lot of that juniper is taking up so much water. So just keeping that in mind, that of course we want to, there are a lot of people are wanting to keep them around for various reasons, that we try to balance that with how much they are consuming.
I added that I agree with all that stuff. Just from a civil engineering standpoint, I think from a value standpoint, obviously forest health does not have to is not mutually exclusive from safety, but this is such critical infrastructure in a firefighting operation. I think safety has to be the giant paramount consideration, and everything else needs to be secondary to making sure that these facilities and the communication things that are on the property function in the event of an emergency. I think that is paramount to the operation of these. Forest health and a lot of these other things don't rely entirely on these super small micro sites, but we do see a lot of use, like at overturf. There's a lot of potential for and risk of just the public up there setting off fireworks and 4th of July, like you name it. These things are very accessible, and so fire protection is super important on these sites.
Ariel, what was the name of the group that you said you have and that organizations could join it?
Yeah, it's called the Central Oregon Wildlife Education Group, and it is a subcommittee of the Central Oregon Fire Prevention Cooperative.
Is that something you could put in the chat? Is there like a link?
We don't have a page or anything. Actually, it's in the process of updating a website. But I could put the name of it in the chat, and I would just say, sorry, if anyone's interested, to reach out to me.
Thank you.
I think Brian brought up a good point too of, is this plan surrounded about, fire from within spreading out to the surrounding areas, or coming into this, and this is more of like a break to protect infrastructure of how we might, assess, put together the plan for these areas?
Well, I'm interested too in, so Ian, I'm gonna put you on the spot, Ian. So he's our brand new urban forester, but he's brand new, so we'll be nice to you.
We do it to everybody.
But how this might relate to your plans to ultimately develop a urban forestry plan, canopy, percentage goals, those types of things?
Sure. Yeah, it's very nuanced, and I'm still getting to grips with all the bits and pieces of overlapping code, whether it's municipal code, development code, flammable vegetation code. I did recently have a meeting with fire and code enforcement, and this was particularly in the context and planning. And this is particularly in the context of smaller properties that are subject to the development code because they're over an acre and they're looking to remove dead trees. Now, it was proving to be somewhat onerous for, Joe Smith on a relatively small parcel that is bigger than an acre, but only like a couple of acres. And all he's looking to try and do is remove some clearly dead standing trees by hand. And typically that would require a grading permit, which requires an engineer's sign off, yada, yada. So it was an onerous process. So we're trying to figure out ways to adhere to the code and at the same time not make it a burdensome procedure for these smaller parcel owners. I've also been having conversations with BPRD as they look to do fuel mitigation in places like Archie Briggs, and trying to figure out how better to streamline that process. Yeah, obviously the wildfire piece is super important. As to the specifics of the code, there's not a ton there, so there's not a huge amount to lean on. But the problem we were facing was, the fire department can go in and give a prescription, which is probably, in some instances, was way more than would be supported by the code. So finding that balance of making it streamlined enough for people to get on with the work, but not, taking everything down to bare soil and completely denuding the property of, vegetation and habitat. Yeah, it's tough to find that balance, and we're working towards that. Whether or not that gets addressed in something like a 10-year urban forest management plan remains to be seen, but suffice it to say that it's definitely, at the forefront of my mind. We're looking at ways to make sure everybody's playing off the same page and applying the same codes, and making it a workable process for people that are trying to reduce fuels and make properties a lower risk for big wildfire events.
Can we go back to or forward to the questions, Aubrey?
Yeah. All right, so we've been chatting about this a little bit, but kind of what values are important for this concept of a long-term management plan that would be, coordinated or maybe worked on in partnership to help balance those different uses: ecological health, social impact, functional use. We're kind of using this Overturf Butte as an example, a case study, to be able to have something concrete to react to, but folks might have ideas, just, other things in your neighborhood or properties that you're involved in managing where you think like this is working pretty effectively, or this is a good example of a place that's pretty complex. Ian, go ahead.
Sorry, one thing I was going to add in terms of these bigger programmatic pieces like an urban forest management plan. Next year, we are going to be doing a citywide GIS tree inventory database collection for trees on city streets, right of way, otherwise on city property. Then the urban forest management plan, but also an important metric that we'll be looking to leverage moving forward is an updated LiDAR-based canopy cover survey. So that would be for the entire city limits, trees on public property and private property, assessing that shadow, the shade that they throw over impervious surfaces. It's a metric that we use in our urban forest planning, so we can monitor the change in the urban forest over the years. With the tree inventory and the LiDAR study, you can also come up with a metric for carbon sequestration and also stormwater absorption. Those are definitely metrics that can be useful for your water management plans, if not your, SPDES permits, because trees should absolutely be calculated in as part of your green infrastructure, your stormwater infrastructure.
Quick question about that, Ian. Are you guys going to do some spectral analysis on that LiDAR imagery to correlate that with species composition within the city?
Potentially, it sort of depends how we do it. You can, the traditional 30,000 foot, aircraft-based LiDAR might not give you that, but there are ground-based LiDAR systems that have better, more expansive data sets, because you can get like trunk volumes, you can get canopy spreads, and you're closer to the canopy itself, so you get probably a more detailed spectral analysis. So yeah, TBD is the short answer.
So part of this might be funding.
Yes.
We had hoped to acquire a grant for an urban forest management plan, and as you know, a lot of grant money has gone away. So, but Ian, I think there would be some good discussion internally with Dan and Elizabeth here about other needs, kind of like you've alluded to, for the conservation program and for the stormwater program, that might be a way to cobble together dollars to do that. And I don't know if maybe the Parks District has interest too in doing some stuff together, but
yeah, potentially.
Not trying to speak for Bronwyn here sitting next to me. She didn't kick me, so.
I think it's definitely worth discussing.
Okay, so definitely hearing for that first bullet point. I mean, we've identified, some of the values, at least with the the water and the infrastructure components and the safety around those sites. You know, Ariel alluded to, you know, the importance of the ecological health of the site. Obviously, we have stormwater would be probably the next big one for us, right? Making sure we're retaining that water, keeping that water on site. I mean, from a park standpoint, I mean, your value is maintaining that site for recreation, right? So that's probably pretty important. The other things we had on there, I think were like resource use, aesthetics of the neighborhood, that sort of thing. You know, so we're going to hear about all those as we bring stakeholders to this. We did have a few neighbors reach out that were interested in participating in the long-term planning. I think we're probably pretty early on for that, but definitely they would have a voice in this discussion too. So maybe that could be wrapping up this first bullet, just identifying some of those obvious stakeholders. Definitely, you know, city staff, our partners with Ben Parks and Rec.
Yeah.
We would love OSU Extension, Ariel. We'd love you to be involved.
Probably
Who
county,
else?
but I'm not sure
The
about
county?
the person from the county, but the county,
Okay.
yeah.
Well, I think there's kind of two versions of this, and maybe we think of OverTurf as maybe it's an example site to try how to put a plan together, and then that could spread to other sites, because there's a cost component of figuring all of that out, let alone then implementing activities on these sites. I mean, Dan mentioned the cost that was, and we went with a second bid to get the cost down a bit, but just for 20 feet buffer around that park site, what was that, 24,000?
We spent 25,000.
Like, wow. I don't know how much Park spends on this, but it must be a lot.
A lot. Yeah,
Yeah.
there, we've actually dedicated some budget to like kind of annual. Now we're starting to plan out like which properties we're going to and when, and dedicating funding for that, just so we can stay on top of it.
So Dan, maybe there's an opportunity to talk together about this, because I feel like in some ways, Park certainly is ahead of us in figuring out how to manage some of these types of urban open spaces. And I wonder if there's some way to work on that together.
Yeah, and then I think even higher level, like these happen to be utility sites, which is why we're involved,
Yeah.
right? But identifying someone within the city, is that our property manager? Is that someone else who needs to be spearheading these across the city too?
Or somebody like Ian, you know? Oh, I got a smile from that.
And one more thing, right? Okay.
COIC still doing any sort of like fuel recovery stuff? I know they were managing a lot of those types of projects at one point.
They were, but I think that was the era of Phil Chang working there. And I think what I've noticed, because I interact with them through the Deschutes Basin Water Collaborative, is they don't have much capacity anymore on the natural resources side, which is unfortunate, because I wanted to talk to them about the Central Oregon Stormwater Manual as well. And I think we'll end up managing that. It's worth
Well,
asking.
they do support the Central Oregon Wildfire Workforce Partnership, which is working with Heart of Oregon and Youth Crews. If that was what you're referring to.
What is that? What is their support? What's their role?
They're able to, they run these youth crews that come out to certain areas. You just like submit an application and they'll be able to come out and support with a lot of the fuels reduction work.
That's interesting. So we should get a hold of them for that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, Paul Cantino, or I can put his contact in the chat. And also just a heads up that since the last legislative session, there's a whole bunch of money that just got earmarked for the Oregon State Fire Marshal and Oregon Department of Forestry to be doing a whole new round of grants that will be coming out within the next year that I think the city would be eligible to apply for.
Well, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. You're a wealth of information.
I
wonder
think.
if- Go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh
Mark.
yeah, sorry. This is Mark. Just sort of at a high level, having done this sort of exercise of trying to think about what values and metrics to use for green infrastructure types of strategies, and also sort of fire and the like. I think a lot of what you guys are naming is really good, and I think those first two bullets, just to be explicit about it, I think it's implicit what we're saying is that when you can find ways to identify and quantify and communicate benefits in terms or metrics that feed right into other objectives, it's easier to find those partners for funding, and maybe even for design sort of details. So thinking about, I guess we already thinking about water and fire are looking at multiple objectives, and with parks, we're bringing that in, and potentially utilities. And sometimes there are things like habitat mitigation. In San Diego County, we're doing some work where there's some endangered butterfly habitat mitigation for habitat conservation plans that's paying for open space and park maintenance and development of this sort, and sort of things like management of invasives and the like. And when we look for private partnerships, sometimes tying into certainly those property value type pieces, but and other economic development issues, and even just trying to build them into terms like the city council goals, or as the growth plan and comp plan develop other objectives that are tied to that, as often as you can close the gap for some potential partner or the audience between how it aligns with these other objectives, especially in this era of limited funding. Getting that multiple objective funding is just getting more and more important. So I don't know if that, so part of the question would be, are there other potential funding partners or maintenance partners, or even sort of how the local community plays a role in maintenance or management or similar, that you'd want to try to tap into by getting both the benefit metrics in those terms, but also potentially using those benefit metrics to help think about some tweaks in design in terms of what you're trying to put on the site or have the site function as.
So that transitions right into that, is there other needed evaluations or research to be done there to kind of identify some of that, right?
Yeah.
I think, Rick, you mentioned that you found some species, I think it was a penstemon, that was indicative of a very healthy functioning site,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. And that's a concern about kind of the work that's being done out there currently. It's like, how does that affect the functionality of that system that's on site? Or is it just turn, like we saw in those stormwater facilities, just turn those areas into cheatgrass, which is, from a fire perspective, not necessarily a good thing.
Right.
So that could be one of the research opportunities out there, is kind of monitoring what that plant association does in response to these thinning and reduction projects. That'd be fascinating.
And
Yeah.
I mean, that also makes me think that I would strongly encourage whoever you do end up contracting with, that you have that outlined in the prescription of that they're not just running all over the place, tearing things up. I mean, you can put that into your prescription with them, that they maybe use same roads or trails as they're going in there, or it sounds like a lot of hand thinning anyway. And then, considering if there is a serious invasive plant issue, treating that first before you even get in there, because any work that's being done in there is just going to exacerbate that problem.
Yeah, any disturbance.
This is great. This goes to the multiple values, and sometimes things are made a little too simplistic. So this might be a good place then, Dan, to jump into. You're going to talk to us about how we might discuss this in terms of a other types of sites, more dense.
Yeah, we can move on. Aubrey. So we're transitioning, the same theme here. So we wanted to bring up a few of the things that, we're seeing now with the new landscape code, with development happening, and kind of, the transfer of these kind of values, to these more urban or high density areas, right? So the big open space, these large areas, this is, one type of plan. How do we do it with all these different interests and balance that with the way we're developing here in Bend? So next slide, please, Aubrey. And so one of the things that, my team and I are seeing, in our work throughout the city, and now the plan reviews and things that we're involved with, is just, the limited green space, right? This overlaps into stormwater as well. We're getting tighter and tighter, and we're running out of space for all the things that we want to balance. And so, all these different elements, and the impacts of what we're ending up with, right? So we have, landscape code that we talked to this group about last year when we were getting ready to roll out, with xeriscaping now and all the right of ways. And, we're seeing a lot of rock being used. That's not in our code. We're allowing like mulches or rock to be used, but we're seeing a lot of rock. And we anticipated some of that and, the effects of that. And so we added language in about, a certain density of plant material and the requirement for trees and irrigation in these areas, to try to mitigate some of that climate impact, the chemical inputs that they would need to, maintain what could be the result of these rockscapes, right? And then, other balancing that with like other city efforts. So Lori she has a little bit more knowledge about this than I do, but there's
Bloomberg effort.
a current Bloomberg effort.
So the Bloomberg thing, I don't know a lot about it, but the city was selected. So through the Bloomberg initiative, multiple cities have an opportunity to have experts come in from around the country and help them discuss a hot policy topic. And so the city of Bend was selected as one of the folks going through the initiative this year. And the topic that was selected for Bend was wildfire management, and urban forest interface and all that type of stuff, which matches well with the fact that we have council goals this year around some type of putting into place some type of wildfire. We'll call it hardening code. City of Sisters just did that. They're kind of leading in that, but we wanted to be able to insert into that conversation about managing and setting codes and standards for wildfire to also be thinking about these other things like water conservation, water-wise, fire-wise, about our other needs, about stormwater management, about urban tree canopy and urban heat island effect, because what could potentially come out of this might be like, well, let's just have hardscapes everywhere and not a lot of shade and not a lot of soil moisture, which is not necessarily beneficial from a fire standpoint, let alone from an aesthetics and livability standpoint. So what I know about the Bloomberg effort is it has just kicked off. There was an in-person set of workshops that's going on today and yesterday. And so our kind of liaison and who's managing this is the city's emergency manager, Carrie Carl, who also, which is wonderful, has a background in parks. She worked for the Parks Department in Eugene in her last job. And so I've talked to her about following up after this meeting and about what we talk about being input to that effort and about hopefully that effort thinking about water and ecological values in addition to the fire side of things. So this discussion today will be provided as input to whatever that group's going to do. So I'll leave it at that at this point.
Yeah, so thanks, Lori. I think one of the things that we've identified is, as people try to balance all these new codes and requirements, the default is to kind of, as Lori mentioned, rather than try to handle irrigation or handle the green space or handle the thinning or the prescription, like the default we've heard multiple times is like, well, we're gonna go to pavers, right? We're gonna do, like you mentioned, some sort of hardscape, or we're just gonna rock it, right? And just leave it. And, that's maybe the easy answer to fix whatever they're dealing with at the moment. And so we know we need more education and more handholding on like, okay, well, here's an alternative path you could take, right? And we can get that end result we're all looking for. But it's more complex, and maybe it is more steps for folks. And there's not always that willingness, to go in depth and take that path. So just considerations. But this, is affecting how we're doing plan review, how, Ian's work with the tree canopy, like where we're putting these street trees. There's limited space sometimes on property if we can't fit it in the right of way, or maybe we're not getting as many trees as we want in the right of way. So there are some implications that we're seeing. There's an answer, but it's making that type of work increasingly difficult, right? Because, if we can't have a canopy within 10 feet of a roof line, well, some of these lots are so dense, their whole front yard is maybe 5 feet off the back of the sidewalk. And so then we're looking for more columnar trees or moving a tree so it doesn't interfere with that, at its maturity. So just, a lot of things that we're noticing out there as things get implemented, right? It's really easy to create the policy and the code, but then the implementation is obviously, like we're aware, is the challenge. So I think next slide, please, Aubrey. I think so. The question here is, we're starting to see in different areas. I think this was like the Association of Landscape Architects in California. They're passing like a zone 0 bill or legislation. And so there's been some pushback from some of the green industry as like, well, again, it's like the partisan, like two ends of the spectrum, right? It's going to be really extreme. So where's that middle ground? But knowing that this is kind of like the reaction we get from folks sometimes, is how do we define success and provide them examples so they don't go to the extreme in dealing with these.
And we kind of had an example of that last year when we were writing and then implementing the new right-of-way code for landscape. We received some pushback actually internally about why do you care if how about just let people put rock in the landscape strips, street trees because they're required, and then just rock. What do you care? That's great for water conservation, right?
Right.
And so the argument back was that that's actually not the best scenario long term. The best scenario, even for water conservation. I mean, we have to water stuff because we're in Central Oregon, but so the most balanced approach is actually to have some plant material and maintain soil moisture, which then is a positive thing for fire management. But folks immediately went to, why don't you just put rock everywhere?
Right. Right. And so, something that we've talked about and different people in this group have talked about before, and we mentioned like, here's an opportunity for us, back to Bronwyn's point of having that consistent messaging, having that, kind of unified approach to this. And I think we've got good examples on both sides. I think it would be beneficial to create, a combined example of what we're looking for that includes all the elements. And then I think Mark brought this up at the tour, was like, now how do you communicate that to people, right? What's the communication conduit to make people aware of this and really educate them on all the benefits to, that they're really achieving both goals here, right?
I think, is that the next slide, Aubrey?
So yeah, next slide, Aubrey. So some municipality, there's examples of municipalities that are doing this. California Water Services already has a website up about this. Northern Water in Colorado is actually creating templates. And like Amy Jo, you and I talked about how nice that would be to, I think this would really help direct people and provide some guidance on, you know, this is what the goal can look like. You have choices, maybe you have a variety of choices of, you know, aesthetic or depending on your use and needs of your yard, like this is how you could implement it and kind of really outlining those steps. And I think we've seen examples of success with the template route in the development code, you know, with this right-of-way code. You know, I would say a majority of the permits that we get in are using those templates. And to be honest, and I don't know whether it's the templates or not, but it's providing another area of conversation and providing information. And so
yeah, so maybe it's not code for private property, but maybe it's templates that
Right.
people could use as good ideas for landscaping and
exactly. And for like different areas that we're talking about today, right? These open spaces versus a neighborhood versus like an HOA common space. So varying scopes of size and whatnot. But I guess my only point was, I think that templates at the end of the day are leading to a lot of the success we're having at the inspections, and these homes are being built and we're not having to go back and fail inspections or make, you know, major alterations to what they've done. So I think
yeah.
always providing guidance and information up front is super helpful.
I can attest to that. We worked with Dan diligently to find templates, and it's been really successful for our projects. So,
Yay.
Well, and I think I would want to add that to me, there's all this prep work that goes into planning these things, and I would encourage us to be looking at what happens after things are put in place. Because what I see a lot of in my work is, you know, plant health being left out of the equation. So you end up with, let's use efficient irrigation, but not sufficient enough to keep that tree going. Let's, you know, and then if you're trading off like dieback from drought stress, or if you're trading off insects moving in as a secondary pest to environmental factors causing stress, then people are using pesticides. So maybe they are saving water, but now they're using pesticides. So I kind of want to see like the next level of plant health also incorporated into our thinking. And so that then that plant's going to be successful, get it to its fullest size, create that shade, whatever it is we're looking at, bring in more wildlife, insect habitat, food for birds, those kinds of things. So we're kind of looking at the big picture as well. And I feel like that part is often not talked about, the overall plant health once the plants are in, or if we're looking at removing for fire-wise stuff, like taking things out, how that impacts plant health as well with those plants that are left behind.
So it seems like it'd be great to have the conversation about what would it take for us to take what are really some existing templates and resources and to refine them. What would be, is it dollars we need to find? Is it just time on our calendars? But I'd be interested in having that conversation, Jim.
Yeah, that's a good point, because we see the same thing with irrigation itself. Right? Irrigation systems go in from day one and they might look great, and 2 or 3 years down the line, no one's touched it. And now all of a sudden it doesn't work the same, right? And it's that maintenance piece that, you know, we really need to address. And 9 times out of 10, those are the issues we see when we go out to do an evaluation. It's like, oh, well, this just hasn't been maintained for several years or what have you. And these systems are dynamic, and, you know, landscapes are even more so. So it's almost like, you know, a follow-up piece to that template is creating that maintenance guide with it.
Yeah. Hey, Aubrey, how are we doing? Time check. How are we doing? Do we need to transition?
I think we're right at that pivot point. But maybe if there's any other kind of quick thoughts on this topic of, you know, sort of opportunities to to combine these different types of guidance materials or particular methods to get that out? We've talked about the templates being a proven tool in other contexts. Is there anything else that we haven't kind of touched on that folks think would be a good idea to put into the mix here? And then we can switch.
Ariel had a comment. Do we want to read that? Something about revisiting a one-pager?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it was, Dan, as you remember, it was a few years ago, but maybe we want to revisit that and utilize this lens of everything that we were just talking about to edit that piece as, use in outreach. And if there's interest in that, then yeah, that question of maybe it's time on the calendar for those who want to be a part of it. But I love the templates idea. I think that's great. I just really want to make sure that the messaging is in there, that no one has to follow the template exactly, that every situation is different. It's, I don't want anyone to get this idea that it's a blanket recommendation. Yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
Nice. Thank you.
There was a really good xeriscaping OSU extension guide that was out for a long time. And I don't know if that's still being updated, but that could be a source or something, a resource for this too.
We do have an updated version of it. Yeah.
That's a great one.
Nice.
Yeah. Pull from existing. Okay. Yeah.
And
Let's
the
talk about that.
monitoring stations that you're putting up around the city for environmental conditions, are those in? Or are they
We're putting in rain gauges.
rain gauges?
That's a little bit on hold because what we were getting.
Oh, the ET?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we'll have,
ET stuff?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, so basically, the person in charge of that got tasked with all the hydromet.
Okay.
So they were doing all the weather stations, and they also got lumped on all the hydromet stations, so all the water monitoring stations. So she's a little bit behind schedule, and
Yeah, we're on the list. We will be doing that.
Yeah.
But with federal cutbacks, each person who's left is doing a lot more.
Yes.
And so it's just taking longer to get those in place. But yes, that's definitely on the
but
agenda.
we've identified the sites, so we'll have two park facilities. One at Pine Nursery and Big Sky. Then we'll have another one at a city site on the west side at Aubrey Butte. And trying to think, there was one more.
Just thinking
We
the
have at least
template idea, because the environmental conditions around Central Oregon vary so much that it may affect the template design.
Yeah, microclimates will have to come into it somehow.
Yeah.
Agreed. Awesome.
Great.
Good discussion. I'm sure we could keep going, but we need to give Elizabeth and Brian a little bit of time here because they have a template to talk about.
Right. Good
Good
segue
segue.
into template. Yeah. Elizabeth, do you want me to just introduce this, or do you want to, can I give a little quick intro?
I think I have some slides just to introduce the topic again. Okay. So we're going to talk today about a post-construction template for residential developments. And so this is part of our requirement in our MS4 permit to make sure that people are installing stormwater controls for new development that creates or replaces 5,000 square feet of impervious surface. And then kind of not going to talk about the long-term operation and maintenance of these facilities today, but that is also part of some of our requirements. And we did go to council in September to revise our code to ensure that we're meeting this update. And then our implementation deadline is November 1st of this year. And I had one more slide, I think. Okay. And so we're going to talk about like the draft template we have that is supposed to be like a simplified way for builders to install these systems and ensure that they're being sized appropriately so that we're not having stormwater run off site from development. So Brian drafted the template for the city, so I think he's going to share his screen and kind of go over that. We would like input on what the WAG group thinks on it.
And you may be wondering about these templates because this is for a single lot, which often in itself might be less than 5,000 square feet. So how does that imperviousness trigger work? That trigger works if there's a subdivision that's planned and the whole subdivision is going to produce more than 5,000 square feet of imperviousness, then we have to make sure every lot is handling the stormwater or it's being handled at the subdivision level, which doesn't happen very often in Bend. So this is more what specific guidance for builders particularly when they say buy the lots from the developer and put the house on and then scratch their heads about where the stormwater is going to go.
Yep. So yeah, this is a kind of a I'd say one size fits all. It's a very generic template, right? But it was intended to be very realistic, meaning that this is a very reasonable sized lot. This is a 100 by 50 foot lot, so 5,000 square foot lot, which is very typical in Bend. The minimum size lot for the RS zone in Bend is 4,000 square feet for single family detached. If you want to go into townhomes, you can get down even lower than that, 2,000 square feet or lower. But that's a whole different animal to try to tackle right here. So this is meant for what we would call the smaller residential single family detached lots. It's a very typical home layout. This is a floor plan from one of our local builders here. Typical kind of 2-car garage. And we tried to make it somewhat realistic, showing where the utilities are going to come into the site, water meters, a standard 2-car garage, kind of this covered porch entryway. And then this worked out really well because we were able to kind of split the house based on the roof plan into 2 basins, we're calling them. Each of them happened to be almost exactly 1,200 square feet each. So this would be a 2,400 square foot roof area on a 5,000 square foot lot, which is just less than kind of 50% of the total lot area. In my conversations with developers and particularly with home builders, while we have a number of options available for stormwater kind of infiltration, the 2 that are really being used by developers, and at least in probably 95% of the cases, are kind of a subsurface infiltration gallery, which consists of this kind of burrito wrapped rock gallery that's subsurface, or you end up with a system of kind of shallow depressions, or I'm going to call them ponds or swales. They're effectively the same thing, depending on their length and their dimension, their width. But so what this template does is it basically this is the very realistic. These are sized for what it would require to keep all of the roof drainage from this lot on site. The City of Bend's details allow the front 20 feet of the lot to go into the street or right of way, as long as it's not roof drainage or whatever. So that's intended to be the driveway, any of the stuff as it's graded to the street. You're not required to try to capture it as it leaves the site. The development code allows that, and as long as the right-of-way facilities are sized to accommodate that, then that's allowed. So this is what we're really talking about here is roof drainage from these lots. So what this template does is it just shows, you've got this basin area B1, and I'll get into some of this stuff here in a minute, right? But we're assuming that this roof area is captured in downspouts with roof gutters, and then it's piped along the side of the home to this underground infiltration gallery, right? So that's what this half of the house, how that would be treated. This other half of the house, we're assuming, we're illustrating that it would either, in this case, kind of be kind of conveyed by gutters, and then maybe it discharges on grade via splash blocks, right? Or something into a shallow swale. In the case where there were no gutters, then it would just drain off, onto the side of this. That water is then conveyed in a swale back to this rear yard depression. I'm going to call it a swale or a small pond, right? Where it's then infiltrated into the ground. We also provided a couple of other nuances here for folks, meaning that if a facility has a safe overflow passage, right, for the 100-year event, then this facility only needs to be designed to handle the 25-year stormwater event, Okay. And then any overflows from that system would go through this, you know, this swale and out to the street. It says you just have to have safe passage for the overflow event. And this scenario down here, we're assuming that it does not have safe passage for the 100-year stormwater event, and therefore this facility would need to be sized to accommodate the full 100-year storm runoff volume. Let me pause right there for questions in case there are any at this point.
Maybe point out the setbacks too, Brian.
Yep. So yeah. So, you know, typically in the RS zone, residential standard density, you've got a 5-foot side yard setback. You know, almost all builders are building their products to maximize that 5-foot side yard setback. So the only real practical area that you have is in the rear yards. We've got setbacks for these facilities from structures and property lines. So these facilities need to be set back a minimum of 10 feet from the face of the foundation. That's kind of a building code consideration. And then also 5 feet from the side and rear property lines. So what you end up with is kind of this narrow little area in these backyards to site these facilities.
Looks like Brad has a question.
Go ahead.
Hi, Brian. So Lori mentioned that if the subdivision is proposed and it's going to have more than 5,000 impervious, that you guys will require this. What is the minimum? I mean, they're not going to typically tell you what size houses are going to be put on that when they're platting the thing. So what is like the baseline of that you'll have them say they're doing, or how does that work?
So it's gonna be applied to any subdivision or partition at land use, Brad, because the minimum sizes of those subdivisions and partitions would end up triggering the 5,000 square foot impervious based on how big each lot is and how many lots you have when you subdivide or have a partition.
I think he was also asking that you may not know at that point in time what the square footage of each house will be. And so that's, I think actually you're leading right into Brian talking more about this, which is there's these tables down below that will help them figure out the sizing.
Yeah, and I think if I understood your question, even if you are in a subdivision and your lot size is less than 5,000 square feet, you're still going to be subject to this down to the smallest lot sizes by the very nature of the fact that you're in a subdivision or partition, correct?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, so there are no unit sizes that are exempt from this if you're in a subdivision, which is going to be 95% of all the cases. I think what you're saying is the only place this doesn't apply would be on redevelopment on an existing lot, right? That's maybe less than 5,000 square feet. Is that true?
Yeah, or like infill, some small infill might not apply.
Yep.
Brian, could I ask a question?
Yep.
So the conveyance down the sides of the homes to the infiltration galley and to the swale, is that like the one, I guess, to the bottom, it's going to the swale, is that also concave? Or is that like piped conveyance or?
It's intended to demonstrate like an actual swale, yes, so that you could flow water in. It's not, we're trying to distinguish. We wanted to show the scenarios. I don't know that anybody honestly would, I mean, we wouldn't probably do this as the plan, but some people would, right? Maybe like to put a swale alongside of that. But I think the idea there is that you can convey, if you don't have gutters, right, you got to find a way to get this water from the side of your house back to a facility that can manage it.
Yeah, that changes the whole like use and access and everything to a site. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. They become stormwater facilities and not necessarily side yards, right?
I was like, where's the landscape?
I mean,
It's a stormwater facility with a house.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of think that's the stark reality of this exhibit too, is it kind of puts into reality the size and the proportions of these things relative to the cost. So to give you a little bit of example, we'll get into, you know, the table. So one of the things that the city was interested in was trying to make an auto-fillable PDF, which we will convert this to. You mean once we get some basic agreement on the format and the content here, that builders and users could put into this. So, you know, we'll have them be able to input their surface area for each of these basins. And then it will just automatically calculate their total runoff volume for each of those basins through a simple calculation. It's simply the area times the depth of the storm event, right? If they have an overflow path, then they will be able to use the 25-year event. If they don't, then they'll be required to use the 100-year event. And then these other tables will be auto-fillable so that they can put in you know, kind of the drainage basin and put in some basic dimensions to help them calculate the volume that would be provided from those facilities. So if it's a drain rock gallery like this one, you know, they can put in a range of length, width, and depth, you know, things. It'll calculate, you know, the area of that cube, if you will, and then divide that by 0.35. That will give you the amount of rock, you know, volume that's needed to create that underground storage space. And then what I would call some very simplistic pond or swale size calculations, you know, where they're doing length, width, and average depth, to give them a pond storage volume that they're doing, or if it's more of a linear swale, for example, you know, assuming that they can come up with a cross-sectional area, like just say that it's a V-shaped swale, right? That's, you know, 50 feet wide. You know, you can very easily do some math to get a cross-section area, multiply that by the length, and then that would calculate a swale volume for you. The reality is that, you know, most landscapers like to do things that don't look like this. You know, they like to do things that look more like kidneys and all kinds of other, you know, fun shapes and sizes. And that's what we want, right? That's what people want. But there's no way to demonstrate that on such a simplistic template for them to use, frankly.
Yeah.
But this gives them concepts.
Yeah, I mean, what we as
Kristen,
engineers do
you
is
had
we
your
take the average area of each contour, multiply that by the difference between the contours, and you come up with an integrated depth or volume, right, over the whole pond. That's how we do it, but that's not how builders would have the tools necessarily or the training to do it that way. So,
Kristen, you had your hand up at one point.
sorry, can you say that again, Lori?
Kristen had her hand up at one point.
Oh.
Yeah, I think my question was answered, just about the difference between the 25-year flood event and the 100-year flood event, and like how to calculate for that and what you need to put in your infrastructure. But it looks like the calculations are on this page.
Yeah, the ideas, and then kind of going down here to the bottom, we're trying to give them a realistic scenario that really ties directly to the exhibit that just says, you know, here the scenario is as I described. You know, you've got a 1,200-foot roof drainage area that's piped. The 100-year, there's safe passage for the 100-year event, and then therefore you only need to store the 25-year runoff volume. And then we kind of go through a kind of a 3-step process to get to that answer. And then the other scenario here is the pond. You know, as we talked about, there's no safe passage for the 100-year event. You've got to retain the 100-year storm, and then kind of just a quick 2-step process on how to get there. It's intentionally simplified because otherwise it could get really complicated. But I think it hopefully demonstrates what we're trying to illustrate here.
Right, and just to give a little more context, the city has never asked single family type residences to show this information because they were previously exempt in the code, but to meet our permit requirements, we're now asking for this plan to be used and for them to show how they're keeping that amount of stormwater on site.
And we think this folds in really well with the drainage and density discussions, right? Because I think it's just going to make it more and more evident how hard it is to handle as much stormwater on each individual lot. And the city hasn't very often approved subdivision level facilities. We've approved some, but I think it's going to kind of push that argument that we probably need to make that easier to plan up in advance subdivision level facilities. I think for those like the Polish type example where they typically build the houses, that makes a whole lot of sense. I think where it's going to be the harder sell is for the developers that like to sell the lots off to individual builders, and they'd rather not build a subdivision level facility. They'd rather build this, design in as many lots as possible. But I think this will put this out in the open for everybody to see the problem, and I'm hoping will encourage us to move towards more subdivision level facilities.
Yeah, I think it just for the group's benefit here too, if we were to kind of do all of this with just a subsurface infiltration facility, obviously it would be twice the size, right? It just scales because it's 1,200 square feet. So you could basically double that as what you would kind of have buried in your backyard. And it's 13 feet wide. I want to say it's 12 feet long. So it'd be about 24 feet long, 13 feet wide, and the rock gallery is 4 feet deep for this one. So it's 4 feet deep, and then assuming that you're going to have that about 2 feet below grade, right? Because you get a pipe to it, and you got to put some topsoil. You want things to grow on top of it, right? So you're looking at about a 6 foot deep hole, 13 feet wide and 25 feet long to store and retain just the 25-year event from this house.
Yeah. And I'm wondering, like, we got areas of town where it doesn't drain, like down off of Roster House where like
Right.
water comes up into people's crawl spaces. You might be putting that down in underground, but it might not be going anywhere.
Yeah.
And so that's interesting. It's almost like you create the space for the regional control, or that's where you're gonna end up putting the landscaping.
Yeah.
Right? And these are all gonna be,
Yeah, I think this is putting this all out in the open, which is
Yeah.
really a good thing. Brad, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, Elizabeth said we were gonna get rid of that exemption for the single family dwellings. Is that, when is that happening? And then who's gonna be enforcing this sizing? Is that on the permits?
So we went to council in September, and they have the second reading tonight, and then it will be implemented in code 30 days after a second reading.
Yeah, so November 1st.
November 1st.
Okay, great.
And then these will be attached to building permits as part of the submittal checklist. And so they'll be verifying that people have completed this plan and that they've entered information.
Okay, so this plan here is part of the new submittal requirement, and then building's gonna review it?
Yes.
Okay,
Be
great.
reviewing that it's filled out. Yep.
And then it meets the sizing requirements, I'm guessing.
I think there's details we're working out about internal process, Brad, and including
Okay.
city view process and all of that. Yes, definitely.
Okay.
I know
sounds
we're-
good.
right.
We're
Yeah,
coming
no,
up on,
good points.
we're coming up on time here. I wonder, Elizabeth and Brian, is there an avenue for folks to provide feedback offline of our conversation? Because got like 3 minutes left in our meeting. It sounds like folks are interested in maybe spending a little more time with this. Is there an opportunity to provide feedback kind of after today's conversation closes?
So Brian, if we could send it out to the group.
Yeah, absolutely. We're happy to send this out and draft
Yeah.
and solicit comments. I guess, Elizabeth, do you want those to be routed directly to you and then to me, or directly to me, however you want that to?
You can send the comments to me. The only thing is, with us having to implement this in a month, we would really need comments probably by the end of this week if you want them incorporated. So
Yep.
kind of a tight turnaround.
And yeah, I mean, we're just putting this together, so don't be shy about comments, right? Like it all makes it better. So if you see something it's not clear to you, then that's the feedback that we need to help clean it up.
One quick comment I want to make before we end is Dan brought up a really good point about A lot of areas don't drain at all. And having been a landscape contractor for 25 years, when we got plans like this on particular sites, it's like, yeah, that's not going to happen. The builder's not going to do it. The excavator's not going to do it. The landscaper's not going to do it. It's like we have to come up with something completely different than what's engineered by the city to make it work. So that's just the practical end of it.
Yep.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I mean, these things are sized to store the whole runoff volume from that storm, but we don't ever get this theoretical storm volume. It just doesn't happen that way, right? We get high intensity, short duration thunderstorms. We get all this kind of different events, and there's an infinite number of ways you could design this. Although I don't know if infinite is the right word. There's a number of ways you could design it. But getting it to infiltrate is a whole different program, right? And that honestly needs to be done at the land development level. When these houses are built, it's frankly too late. They don't have the size or the equipment. When the landscapers are out there, unfortunately, that's too late to be thinking about this. The size of equipment necessary to build these facilities.
Yep. So this is a step forward and just kind of bringing this all to light. Instead of it, being kind of dirty little secret, right? That it's not working well. This is going to bring it more to light, and it allows us to really push forward on the drainage and density policy implementation.
Yeah.
And it meets a permit requirement, which is the November 1 deadline.
Well, I would argue also with the tree code, right? Like, so we routinely get comments from planters and stuff. Well, why can't you keep that tree on the side yard? Or it looks like that tree in the backyard could be saved, or it looks like this. And like, not when you put the drainage facilities in there, right? Like, you look at these lots and then try to decide how trees are going to be saved and respect the tree protection radiuses required by the tree code. And it starts to become a problem very quickly.
Yes.
All right, real quick. So we'll do a follow-up. You'll get a chance to take a closer look at that template. And if you want to provide additional feedback throughout that, to Elizabeth is what I heard. So you'll get that from our team shortly. Our next meeting is going to be virtual only. It's also going to be focused on stormwater. And then I think we're going to have a guest speaker to talk high level kind of about some of the rate planning work and the research effort that we discussed with WAG earlier on. So
yeah, we should clarify that. That's an update on water rate planning. So yes. Stormwater program and then water rate.
Thank you, Lori, for catching that. Excellent. All right. So with that, we can close it out. We want to say thank you to everybody. Knew there was a lot to talk through today. Really appreciate all the contributions though. And yeah, we'll leave it there. Enjoy the rest of the day.